Hello, my name is Sam Reynolds, and I'm an astrologer. And I just wanted to talk briefly about what's been happening in our country. And when I say our country, I am speaking specifically about the United States of America. I live in New Mexico, Nuevo Mexico. And what I want to say is I've been anticipating some of the events that we've been seeing for close to 15 years. And I'll start with saying that the death of Renee Nicole Good and her murder is not a one-off. And it won't be resolved by the conviction, if we have it, of Jonathan Ross. It is part of a development that I've been tracking publicly since 2009. So I guess a little longer than 15 years. And I started this on Twitter. That account is defunct now, but I have given talks on the astrology of policing and what's been developing in our nation. And I want to talk a little bit about this. First, my condolences to Renee Nicole's wife, her family, her children, her child. And I want to say that it is also the height of a kind of irony in terms of her name, the etymology of her name. I don't mean just the good part, but Renee means reborn or to be born again, and Nicole means victory. So we can hope, Nicole from Nike, from the goddess Nike. So we can hope that some good can indeed come from her death and that some aspects of a movement can be reborn and lead to victory. So, what is the nature of this movement? Well, when I talk about a systemic development related to law enforcement, I'm talking about the entrenched militarization, and we could almost say the creation of a kind of law enforcement civilization, and you aren't in it. I'm not in it. If you are not part of law enforcement, you're not in it. And it has created this mentality of us against them, meaning more so the police, largely law enforcement along various spectra, have come to view the public as not them. And I am not talking about just individual officers. You may have a brother, a sister, a mother, a father, an uncle, a neighbor, a friend who is in law enforcement. I am not indicting these folks necessarily as individuals. They may be, by all, I guess, metrics we could use, deemed as good or values as good. But as a system and as a growing system and civilization, they are not good because they are beholden only to themselves. And this is something that I have predicted would increase over the coming decades. And what I mean by this specifically, when I say over the coming decades, are some very specific things. So I used to debate with my old account on Twitter, SF Reynolds. I used to debate conservatives about the nature of the killings of Black people by the police, which has been well documented. And I would be able to say, as late as 2012, when I would debate them and they would bring up their stats, like, well, you guys commit more crimes and that's why you get shot more, all this. I was like, okay. So considering that, that's more proportionate related to the actual population. It's not that we commit more crimes. It's related to more crimes are committed in general by the larger population, which in this country is mostly white people. I could say to them in 2012, as late as 2012, okay, so show me the newspapers or any aspect of the media where we have whites as killed unarmed whites, I should say. Unarmed whites killed as much as we see among black folks. And in 2012, and I knew this, they really wouldn't be able to do it, and they didn't. They couldn't. Now, 14 years later, I wouldn't make that argument. They could. And what I anticipated some years ago is that this is going to become more of a thing with the police, that we could include more white people who will be killed, which means on some level, no one is safe. Black people, largely in this country, consistent to how we have functioned in this country, are the canaries in the mine. We were the forerunners of what may become more of a deadly trend in policing. And again, I'm not saying that, oh, well, all cops are bad, every single one of them. I think there are some cops who are trying to be decent, but are participants in a system that will eventually and at some point challenge their decency. And many cops know that. Many law enforcement officers know that. So what do we do? How do we talk about this? What does this mean? And I've gone into the astrology of it, and I won't go so much into the astrology of it because what I really want to talk about, beyond just some of the things related to why this is happening, there's been a question I had, like, what is up with Minneapolis? Why why does Minneapolis seem to be this fulcrum, this tipping point for the conversation that accelerates related to the police in this country? And I think I have an answer, and I want to share that with you. But I do want to say a few other things about policing. I want to say that in general, it is going to demand more. We're going to have to give more and demand more than just justice. We're going to have to rethink policing and the nature of policing's charters, whether we're talking about municipal police. Um, and when I say their charters, right now, as it stands in most American cities, most police chiefs answer to the mayor. They don't answer to necessarily the councils or the aldermans in various cities. They will answer mostly to the mayor, which means they don't have enough accountability. On top of that, we have the police unions who broker their power over politicians, over judges, over prosecutors, to the point that many of them are afraid of the police and police unions. So we have to challenge that as well. So we have to challenge the chokehold that law enforcement unions and the like have on municipal politicians and the like. And we have to demand more the care of people over policing. One of the reasons why Renee Nicole Good is no longer with us is that police are trained and have been trained for over 40 years to shoot to kill. They're not trained to shoot to maim. They will, when they have to use their firearm rather than using any other kind of device, they will shoot to kill. And this is mainly because of a formula that law enforcement has worked out, where they emphasize that it costs more to lose an officer than to lose someone in the public. Like, they literally have this calculus. You can look it up, but this calculus is that it is better for a police officer to shoot someone in the public rather than lose his or her life. And I think there can be other ways. And so I think the term defund the police was an unfortunate slogan. I don't think it was completely incorrect in its intention of putting more different kinds of crisis responders, first crisis or first responders in the mix, social workers, mental health professionals. But I think what we have to look into is, why do we have to always call people with guns for any kind of issue that's happening in a community? I don't think that has turned out very well, and increasingly it will not. The other thing I would say is that we have to change the militarization of the police. The police are trained with the idea that they're almost like occupying a territory, much like we talk about when we have invaders in a country. In fact, whether we're talking about our police, the US police being trained by the Israeli Defense Force, or or we have professionals who actually have trained the IDF from the United States. However, we're looking at it, what is happening worldwide, which is why I say it's a civilization, what has happened worldwide is that there's been this increased militarization and thinking of the public, thinking of people almost as if they were part of an occupied territory. So this thinking isn't just exclusive to how Israel treats Palestinians. It is something, a mindset that's cultivated in these United States of America. There are several books I could recommend on this, but one of the chief books, if you want to kind of really go deep in this, into this, and or listen to it, is written by Radley Balko, Balko, and it's called Rise of the Warrior Cop. So I would recommend that book. It's one of the books I started off with maybe about 12 years ago when I was digging deep into understanding this particular dilemma. There are other books subsequently. I think I am going to resurface and redo my talk on the astrology of policing, and I divulge a number of charts astrology related to that, but I wanted to share that for now. So I just wanted to say this is kind of more what we're dealing with or will be dealing with over the next several years. But let me explain a little bit about why we're dealing with this. Why now? Well, why in more so in Minneapolis? First, I want to give a contrast. Most people who understand some astrology learn about astrocartography. And to give credit where credit is due, astrocartography is a very specific way of mapping out your chart, where we give credit to Jim Lewis, who was an astrologer from the late 20th century who mapped out this particular idea. And the idea is that your chart is projected onto a world map and highlighting where planets fall along your ascendant, descendant axis, also your midheaven, and what we call the IC. And as you see here, it covers a zone about 300 miles or 500 kilometers. And so this is usually much more personal. What you're seeing here, by the way, is the Mars on the MC for George W. Bush. So it was very fitting for him that he's the one who initiated a war in Afghanistan, as an example. All right, let's move forward. And so this is generally what an astrocartography map looks like. I believe this map is actually for Mohandas K. Gandhi, because I do a whole class, sidebar, I do a class on part of a course on astrocartography. I have like three, four classes dedicated to understanding astrocartography. So you're getting a very much truncated version of this. And so this is where we're looking at planets as they line up, and you can see the curved lines more suggestive of the ascendant descendant axis, and the straight lines are going to be more related to the MC and IC axis. These are deemed angles. If you're not familiar with these terms in astrology, I recommend particular books or studying with a teacher or learning more online to get more information about that. But this is what this is. However, what's lesser known is something called a geodetic chart. And the geodetic chart is a static projection of the zodiac itself, and then more so how your chart relates to it. And when I say static, with the next slide, you'll see more what I'm talking about. But in general, in contrast to the astrocartography chart or the astrolocality chart, we could say the geodetic chart are more like the ley lines, if you're familiar with those terms or that term, the ley lines for particular places on the planet. And we could say it's more how this place receives you rather than how you receive this place, which I think is more the astrocartography chart. It's going to be your natal chart as this place functions. But here we see, starting from Greenwich, um, that this is zero Aries, and it goes westerly, um, or I should say easterly, sorry. It goes this way, going more toward what we call the east. So Aries all the way wrapping around the globe. So if we were talking about toward Kiev, the midheaven for Kiev is going to be somewhere around 0 degrees Taurus, either on the Aries side or a little over just in terms of Taurus. Where you see the curved lines, similar to astrocartography, are the lines where you see more the curves related to the ascendant and then going toward the descendant. So with this particular line that I was just tracing, let me make sure I have the right annotator here. We could start off zero Aquarius, in this area of the Pacific, is going all the way over to it goes down, up and over here into Leo. And so this is the descendant. So we would say like near Nairobi, we would have more like close to 0 degrees Leo for the descendant, as an example. You're like, okay, that seems cool. So if we were going toward the United States, we see in play from the upper northern area, Aquarius, Capricorn, Sag into Scorpio, as more the midheavens that we might see. And then in terms of the ascendants, we have from Capricorn to Aquarius to Pisces in play, and then Aries and Taurus, and then all the way to Gemini for the United States. And again, you can think of these as static. They do not change. If you project your chart using the geodetic, then it's just going to be a matter of where it lands, in relation to this. So let me use this particular chart. Okay, well, I also have here more description of it. This is the chart I wanted to reference. This is the most common chart that is often used as the chart for the United States of America. It's controversial because um, it is said not to be necessarily a real chart. It's more of a projected chart, not for the literal time for the signing of the Declaration of Independence on July 4th, 1776. But what I will say, and there are other charts to use for the United States, just want to say that. I find a good measure of accuracy with this chart, but one of the things to understand about places, whether we're talking about cities, whether we're talking about countries, is that a country could have multiple charts. So, for instance, Iran is much in the news. There are at least three different or more charts for Iran. Speaking about the theocratic republic that we have for Iran, and then other notions of, or more when we had the Shah of Iran. And so there are other times in which we can use that. Same for Russia. When it was the Soviet Union, and then when it became Russia, we have charts for that. I wanted to use the Sibley chart. Again, I find some measure of accuracy with it, but I was just curious and could reach for it. And this is the natal chart, we could say. 12 Sagittarius rising. The midheaven is at 1 degree Libra. When we project it to Minneapolis, I want to draw your attention to a few things. One, this rising sign, 23 degrees and 9 minutes of Pisces, is going to be the static rising sign for whatever chart you use. If I were to put my geodetic chart in there and I'm a natal Pisces rising, it still would be 23 degrees and 9 minutes of Pisces. What is informative is that the midheaven, the static midheaven, is going to be 26 degrees and 44 minutes of Sagittarius. I'll come back to that. We can see that Neptune is directly opposite to the ascendant within a degree. Um, so even less than a degree. So it's directly opposite to it. Now, I do not acknowledge, just for the record, modern planets as rulers. So if you want to like, oh my God, Neptune, the ruler Pisces, um, is opposite to it, you can go there. I wouldn't, I'm not. But irrespective of that, Neptune is still opposing the ascendant. But it doesn't fully answer the question. What's up with Minneapolis? Why do we find that we have this as a lightning switch or a touchstone for this growing unrest? Whether we're talking about Philando Castile, whether we're talking about George Floyd, or now talking about Renee Nicole Good, and that's just a short list. There's a longer list of odd things, touchstone points that have happened in Minneapolis, including the birth of Prince. So, what are we dealing with here? What I want to take special note of is that the midheaven is the galactic center, 26 degrees, 27 degrees of Sagittarius. So, this is what we could say a focal point for what many astrologers would talk about as a point related to spiritual change and transformation, including, I mentioned this recently on a post that I had on my site, unlockastrology.com, where I talk about, using a quote from Melanie Reinhart, the nature of that particular point, which is the galactic center. So it draws this place, specifically with its geodetic chart, is going to draw a lot of things, a lot of energy to it. Neptune opposing the US ascendant by geodetics, this particular point. And that is going to be more specific because the ascendant is actually more specific to a location than we could say the midheaven. The midheaven is more along lines of longitude or closer to it. But when we're talking about more the aspects of latitude, this changes and varies pretty greatly along different lines of latitude for the ascendant. So the Neptune being opposite to it, Neptune relating to where we deal with confusion, where we deal with things that spark, the idea of a dream, imagination. And one thing that's notable with this geodetic chart, you know, Minneapolis also is called a twin city related to St. Paul, and we're talking about planets that are along the double-bodied axis. Double body related to the four signs that are considered double body: Pisces, Gemini, Virgo, and Sagittarius. So the astrology of this, even we could talk about Mercury opposing Pluto, coming off the Pluto return, that this midheaven has a sextile to the moon for the US. Now, the planetary positions are going to be the same irrespective of where we're talking about the geodetic chart, but the angles, midheaven, IC, ascendant, descendant, those things are going to be different. We also can take notice of the vertex, which deals with like more a coalescent fated point as described by contemporary astrologers as also being square, conjoined to the Neptune, but square to the galactic center. So I think that is also something significant to take into account related to how we can think about um, what is happening with Minneapolis. Why is Minneapolis this hub for a lot of change? Now, I think this will increase. I think this will increase for a couple different reasons. One, tracking it related to Uranus. Uranus is in Gemini for the birth of the United States from the Declaration of Independence. And we're going toward a Uranus return. Now, you may have heard from other astrologers that the United States has never not been at war or dealing with some measure of conflict when Uranus, or royally in conflict, when Uranus is in Gemini. And so we can expect some more of this. And as Uranus comes toward the Mars here, it also comes to be opposite to the galactic center, which again is the midheaven for Minneapolis. Probably within the next 7 years, there's going to be more that jumps off in Minneapolis. So yes, keep your eye on Minneapolis. There's a reason why it's often drawn there, or we can experience it And that's pretty much it in terms of what I have to say. If there are any other follow-ups, I'm going to have this on YouTube. I'm also going to put this on Instagram, and I hope that this has been helpful. Thank you.